It has been nearly 1 month since former One Direction singer Liam Payne died when he fell from a third-floor hotel balcony in Argentina. The toxicology report that was released days later revealed that the 31-year-old had been under the influence of a concoction of drugs and had been acting erratically before he fatally fell. An investigation had been launched into whether or not others were involved in Liam Payne's death, who had been with him last, and who supplied the star with the illegal substances. The latest update is that 3 people have now been charged in connection to Liam's death and that his body has finally been released to his family to be flown back to the UK. Joining me now to discuss the charges and what's next is former police officer and crime expert Peter Bleksley. Peter, thanks so much for your time today. These 3 people now at the centre of the investigation. Can you walk me through who these individuals are that have now been charged in connection to Liam Payne's death?
Yes, but of course we have a very different policing and criminal justice landscape in Argentina to what we have in the UK. And quite frankly, 2 of these people have been charged with offences that simply don't exist over here. And that's leaving a vulnerable person. There is no such charge in the UK. But of course, Liam's tragic death took place in Argentina. So it's their rules, their system, their policing and their investigation, which is going to hopefully give us the answers that so many people want.
It did look very different to what I've seen before, Peter. I hadn't heard of that term myself either. But what does the fate look like for that hotel worker who was alleged to be smuggling drugs into Liam Payne's room?
Well, if somebody has been found to have supplied drugs to Liam, then I'm sure they will face a very stern punishment. But nobody, as we understand it yet, has made full and frank admissions to doing that. In fact, a 24-year-old waiter who said and has admitted during a media interview that he was with Liam on the day that he died, also admitted to taking drugs with Liam, but insisted that he did not supply any. Now, let me just for a minute, if I may, talk you through the law in the UK as it stands. If a person, I'll call them friend A, buys some drugs and decides to share them with their friend B, friend A is guilty of supplying drugs, whether there's money exchanged or not. It's a cut and dried offence. It appears to be a bit different in Argentina, but once again, this investigation's got a long way to go on possible court cases, and I think that the answers that so many of his devoted fans want, and of course family and loved ones, are going to take some time, unfortunately.
But Peter, what if the situation is that friend B was the one that supplied the drugs? What if it is alleged that Liam Payne is the one that had the drugs on him? What does friend A get? What does he get for admitting that he didn't provide the drugs, he didn't bring them into the hotel room, but he partook in the drug taking with Liam?
Okay, so if the circumstances were reversed, there's a very, very slight possibility that in my hypothetical situation, friend A could have been charged with historically possessing drugs, but in all likelihood, that wouldn't happen because if that person then reneged on their statement, said that they hadn't taken drugs, it would simply be impossible to prove.
From your background working so closely across cases, criminal cases like this, Peter, does it look like this was a situation where a group of people took advantage of someone who had a previous track record? He was very publicly known to have a drug and alcohol addiction. Does it look like he's gone to Argentina and various people, including mostly locals, have taken advantage of that?
I would have used the word vulnerable to describe Liam, because as richly talented as he was, it would appear that perhaps as the limelight faded away a little from him and his stardom, that he had issues in his life. We know there was alcohol, cocaine and other possibly prescription drugs in his system. We know his life was getting rather complicated. Some might even say chaotic. We also know There were sex workers that went to the hotel. A person that he met in a restaurant who was working as a waiter went to the hotel. And so there's a very cloudy and unclear picture about who may have done what. What I sincerely hope is that this investigation by the Argentinian authorities is thorough, that it gets to the truth. I would rather the investigation was carried out away from the public gaze and not through the media. But those are the circumstances that we've got. For Liam, for his loved ones, for his legions of fans, the truth must be told.
Peter, a situation like this, as you said, it gains a lot more attention and media scrutiny because of the fact that he is a public figure. If this was an average person, would there be an investigation into who was involved in supplying the drugs, how he died? Would it go further into this?
If this was a case that had happened in the UK and it was a 30-year-old person that nobody had ever heard of, there would still be a very thorough police investigation, because fame should not get you any greater privileges or any higher standard of investigation than if you are the man or the woman in the street. And of course, in the UK, it is the coroner who wants to know so many of the answers, like who was this person? Can we check their identity? How did they die? Where and when? Those questions need to be answered. Alongside, if these circumstances had happened over here, with the evidence of drugs in the system, there would have been a pretty thorough police investigation to try and find out who was the supplier, who did what.
Peter, you mentioned this a moment ago, but one of the charges is to Liam Payne's apparent friend, Rogelio Norris, for abandoning a person followed by death, coupled with the allegations that he supplied drugs. Now, that's certainly not a charge I have heard before, and you said it wasn't something that we have in the UK, but what does this mean? What does a penalty look like in this area?
Yeah, it was, until Liam's tragic death, it was an offence that I'd not heard of before in the Argentinian system. And kindly forgive me, I don't know what punishment it has. The only thing that can get remotely close by way of comparison to the UK would be, for example, child neglect, if an adult left a child unattended. But of course, Liam was a fully fledged adult. So it's a new piece of legislation for me, and I will be watching with interest to see how that part of the investigation proceeds.
It was known that Liam Payne was actually by himself when he died, and he'd either potentially fainted or he was unconscious when he fell. We know that in that situation, Peter, that the hotel basically sent him up to his room. He was acting quite erratically downstairs in the lobby. Does the hotel then become liable in a similar charge for what that guy did, for letting the singer go back to his room by himself in that state?
Again, if it was in the UK, perhaps lawyers might look to see if there was some kind of civil litigation that could be followed. In other words, a case in the High Court rather than a criminal court. Did the hotel have any duty of care towards Liam? That could possibly be explored, although I would think it would be a pretty thin case, to be frank. The tragedy is, of course, that Liam was alone when he fell to his death. The Argentinian authorities have been swift to rule out suicide, but there's one other big question that remains unanswered, and that is the story of whatever happened to Liam's Rolex watch.
Can you elaborate that for me, Peter? Has it been missing since he was found dead?
Yes, and there are images of Liam being on his laptop only a matter of hours before he died, and other pictures that clearly showed Liam in possession of his Rolex. But when the authorities searched his room, which, by the way, is still sealed off and can only be accessed on the word of an Argentinian judge, there was no trace of this watch found. Undoubtedly, it was a valuable timepiece, and so the authorities are still keen to try and find out where it is and who's got it.
Are there any leads on if someone's stolen it, Peter?
Well, that's an inference, I think, which can be taken from the circumstances as we know it. If it's the only thing of value that wasn't there, perhaps somebody's head has been turned and they've fallen into an act of dishonesty. We shall have to wait and see and keep our fingers crossed that the Argentinian police can get those answers as well.
Just another example, I guess, of taking advantage of someone vulnerable, as you said, Peter. But from your background, working across cases, how do you think his final moments played out from when you're picking up the pieces of an investigation like this?
Well, we've seen photographs of the hotel room, and I'm being polite if I say it was in a state of disarray. It had largely been trashed. I think the tragedy here is that Liam was a troubled soul before he died. And in that regard, it's a very human story. I have a huge amount of sympathy for those who loved him, and my heart goes out to Liam. Rest his soul. I myself have been hospitalised twice in my lifetime after having catastrophic mental health breakdowns. If indeed that were what was happening to Liam, then I fear that his last moments, hours, or perhaps even days, he was a tortured soul.
Yeah. Peter, the family have finally been told that they can take Liam's body home back to the UK. This is nearly a month later after he died. How normal is this situation where it takes this long for the family to be able to take him home?
This just prolongs the agony, but I'm sure there will have been conversations between the family and the ambassador of the UK to Argentina, Kirsty Hayes. It's that important a matter. Liam's profile was so high, of course, that I'm sure ambassadorial help has been sought, and I'd like to think that perhaps the ambassador has been of some assistance to the family. We will no doubt find out in the future. I understand that it's most likely that Liam's funeral will be in Wolverhampton. That, of course, will be a matter for the police to get involved with, because I'm sure that legions of fans will want to turn up to pay their final respects to a much-loved pop star.
Peter, just finally, how likely is it, do you think, that there will be sentences, there will be proper arrests for anyone involved in Liam Payne's death?
Clearly, his death was not straightforward, complicated set of circumstances, and we're seeing so much of it play out in the media, courtesy of people like that waiter giving an interview, which was a very strange interview from the clips that I've seen. I'm an optimist, so I will remain hopeful that Argentinian law enforcement can get the answers to the questions that so many people have at the moment that are firmly unanswered. I fundamentally hope that those answers, of course, are achieved for Liam's parents, and most of all, may this young, hugely talented entertainer who brought so much joy to so many people around the world, may his young soul rest in peace.
Peter Bleksley, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.